Hey, what's up, guys? This is Mike here. I'm in at San Diego Code School. This is my week 7 now vlog for the full stack development program. So I'm feeling a little anxious, but also kind of excited at the same time. Because anxious being because I realize I'm already more than halfway through the program, which is a good thing, and excited because I'm almost about to be done with the program, right? So it's a good time, interesting time for me. Got a couple more modules to push through before I get onto the group projects and then do the internship with San Diego Code School. So I'm looking forward to that. Um, Hopefully, I'll probably be done around end of August, around that time or so. So looking forward to that. Biggest challenge I faced this week, I would probably have to say, is um, I would say just understanding the different types of databases as far as like SQL versus NoSQL, understanding the difference between how they're structured, how schemas are structured. How do you query like those type of databases? How do you query a SQL database versus a NoSQL, right? Um, how is the data returned? What's the main learning about the main differences between those two, but most importantly, being able to understand them in a way to where you could understand how they could work with an actual full stack application, right? So being able to make calls to the database from, like, let's say your backend Express server or Node, and Node, using Node, I mean, and understanding how it's going to retrieve that data, but more importantly, what kind of how it's going to be retrieved, right? Like in what form? Is it going to be an object? Is it going to be returned in tables? Stuff like that. But anyways, I felt like that was probably the biggest challenge for me this week. This week wasn't too bad compared to some of the weeks previously. But it's been going good nonetheless. And I was able to overcome that challenge as far as just like learning about the databases by, just reading documentation and whatnot, stuff like that, but also like confirming my assumptions about the way things are working, especially with people who are working on the same modules as me, or even like asking somebody else who has more experience with those things um, if I'm understanding them correctly, right? So it's always good to get confirmation about things like that. Make sure, like, although it looks like you're understanding everything, it never hurts to get that kind of second opinion just to make sure, right? So, um, most important new thing that I learned this week was actually learning about NoSQL databases. Previous to the program, I had took a database design class at Cal State Northridge, where I graduated from, and it was a really good class. I learned a lot about not only how to do the SQL queries, but I learned a lot about databases in general, as far as how they're structured. Learned about primary key, foreign key, functional dependencies, schemas, stuff of that nature. We built a database from scratch, everything from like the tables to each column, each rows, everything. We established all the ERDs, learning about entity relationship diagrams. That's what ERDs stand for. But just like that was good exposure, right, to SQL. But the most interesting thing and most important thing that I learned was learn about NoSQL, because I had always kind of heard about it, but I didn't know necessarily what it was, how queries worked with it, and I never just really knew of like a known example of a NoSQL database, right? So like in this case, when I was going through two modules this week, DB100, DB200, these are both database modules. I was covering working with things like MongoDB, which returns the information as an object. So when you're going to go query that information, you actually query it in the form of objects, which is actually pretty cool, because it's not like your traditional SQL query where you're like select all columns from customer table where like the customers were from California or something like that, right? So With MongoDB, it'll be more like, db.customers.find find customers from California, and then you'll encapsulate that like within an object, right? So it's different the way it's structured, but it's actually kind of cool because you realize that because it's unstructured in that way, I feel like it could be easier to grab data, as well as to be able to store it, right? But there are like pros and cons to using both types of databases, but I won't really cover those right now. But nonetheless, it was still pretty cool to learn about NoSQL, as well as learning about. We did a Redis workshop, which we worked with the command line, and then in conjunction with a program called Metis, and that was definitely a NoSQL uh, database as well, and we learned about just how to do queries and stuff like that as well within that NoSQL database. So that was pretty cool too and very useful. Also learned about GraphQL, which is like a very popular, or it's becoming popular if it's not already. If you don't know what GraphQL is, it's essentially just a type of database technology that's utilized primarily with React Native. And it's starting to gain a lot of traction now just because of the way it functions and it works. And if you guys are interested in learning more about GraphQL, I highly recommend visiting the documentation page for GraphQL, and it literally will give you the whole entire lowdown as to how information is structured, how you can query things, and it's actually very cool because the biggest thing that you'll take away probably from GraphQL right when you learn it is that the way you search for data in GraphQL is the same exact form that you'll get it back as. So if you search for name, right, somebody's name, it'll literally just give you that same exact structure, exactly the way you search for it. It'll give you that same back structure and form as the result. So that's kind of cool and useful. And as far as other things as well too, we've been deploying all of our apps on Heroku now, which has been pretty cool. We were covering that actually, or I was doing that in the Ops 200 module. So deploying apps on Heroku instead of the Now command line interface, it's been pretty solid. I actually prefer hosting it on that in comparison to Now, but it's pretty good. It's pretty cool. It's just essentially a web hosting service where you can host static websites and whatnot. But on top of that, I was using Circle CI, which essentially is used for integration, and you can essentially, like, what you can use it for as a prime example is like when you go to deploy an app to Heroku, you can have Circle CI run tests against your application to make sure that there's no bugs in it, which is pretty cool because it'll all happen during the build and the deploy phase, which is pretty cool. And you can see that happen in real time using Circle CI's website. So that's pretty cool. And it's pretty easy to set up too, which is really great. And if you guys are interested in learning more about that, feel free to look that up as well. And it's very straightforward to use and very cool to use. And so now I have just recently wrapped up DB200, and I'm beginning to work on Node 200. So the first project I'm going to be working on is my personal portfolio. So I'm going to be building that out, currently using EJS, which is just embedded JavaScript. So that way I can write HTML dynamically. And I think it'll work out pretty good. I don't think it will be as extensive as like how you would do a portfolio website with React, but it also will still be better than basic HTML5 and CSS. So I'm interested to see how that's going to come out. And of course, I'll link my projects and whatnot on the portfolio page as well. And then we'll deploy that on Heroku as well. And I would say, I think just in general, based on all the information that I covered this past week, any advice that I have for people learning about databases primarily, or even learning about just different technologies like Circle CI or Redis or anything like that. I would just say just literally look up documentation, or if you're working with, like, let's say you don't know what SQL queries are, you don't know what select does, you don't know what subqueries are, you don't know where inner joins are, then just literally just Google it. It's honestly the best thing you can do, and it's the most efficient thing you can do because it's just going to cut down that learning curve for you dramatically. And there's plenty of examples. I found a lot of useful websites on Google. One of them was W3 Schools. They had a lot of primary examples, and what I like about it is that not only do they give you examples and the general syntax for SQL queries, but they will literally tell you what the actual query itself does. So like it'll tell you how where is used in a conditional, or it'll tell you how select is actually used, or aggregate functions like taking the average of like certain prices or something like that. So documentation is huge. Asking people next to you or people who are just further along in the curriculum definitely never hurts. And most importantly, just Google examples. There's tons of examples, and people will more than often will provide an explanation for everything that they're posting about, whatever that may be. So that's pretty much been it for this week. Looking forward to see how my personal portfolio website's going to turn out, and I definitely plan on improving it over time, even after I finish it, because I feel like it's going to be a never-ending kind of project, right? You're always going to want to update your portfolio website with the newest projects or passion projects that you're working on. So looking forward to that, and then also just looking forward to working through this Node 200 module in general. So until next time, I'll see you guys then.